All right, so we go from the seed to the spark. The spark is something that will spark in us, hopefully, some inspiration. And it's our speaker today is Kylie Stedman Gomes, something like that. I believe it's Portuguese, her last name. And well, let me read this first, then you can turn around. Normally I don't do this, but I love her bio. And if you didn't see it, I want to read it to you right now. It's short and it's very clever. Kylie is Australian by birth. She's an ocean lover, sailor, and traveler by nurture, and prefers activities of the scout archetype of the kairotic flow, which she's going to talk about today. She loves exploring the unknown and chasing intriguing rabbits, and considers herself an incorrigible generalist with a wild and sometimes troublesome talent for spotting zombies trying to pass themselves off as living entities. Kylie presently lives in Portugal and will be speaking to us from Portugal, thousands of miles away, with her Portuguese husband. She lives there with her Portuguese husband. Is it Manuel or Manuel? Manuel? We'll find out. And is writing a book on kairotic flow so she can get out of its way. So I am not going to tell you what kairotic flow is. I will leave that to the expert. And let's give a warm circle welcome to Miss Kylie. Please turn around so you can be comfortable, everybody.
So I'm just going to share screen.
There we go.
So, well, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me here to speak today. My name is Kylie Stedman Gomes. I'm Australian by birth and married to a Portuguese guy, Manuel, which is how I ended up living here in Portugal, and why, after 14 years, I'm still learning how to say my own name properly. Anyway, my journey to orienting myself to life and spirit was, I believe, necessary for me to discover kairotic flow and now serve life and spirit by sharing that discovery. Looking back on my life now, I realize the tremendous influence of my wilding childhood on how I see the world. My schooling was atypical, more like unschooling or the school of real life, rather than normal batch-driven factory model compulsory schooling. Most people grow up on solid land, in a slow-changing building, surrounded by familiar people beyond their nuclear families. Not me. My first memories are of living on a 45-foot sailing yacht in that picture there, which I later learned that my father built in our backyard in Kalgoorlie, a mining town surrounded by desert in Western Australia. We lived on that boat cruising up the east coast of Australia from when I was about 2.5 until I started school at age 5. My younger brother was brought onto the boat when he was 3 days old and learned to walk on water. I remember watching him hold on to cabinets and preemptively dropping to all fours when a swell came. And I had no idea that most babies crawl on flat, unmoving floors, and so don't need to stick their limbs out sideways like a lopsided crab to keep their balance. I also didn't realize that most people don't wake up to find that their house has flipped around on its anchor overnight and is now facing the opposite direction. My first scar, which is here, came from getting propelled out of my bunk while I was sleeping through a cyclone. I didn't know I'd learned to swim early as basic boat safety, or that I'd been living as part of a functioning team with my parents, even if that just meant staying safe in the cockpit by paying keen attention to movements and sounds and responding with common sense as the world around me changed continuously. In my 3rd year of school, my parents sold that boat and used the money on a 16-month round-the-world trip, New Zealand to Fiji to Hawaii, then camping for a few months across the US, west to east, zigzagging, pitching a tent every night. We all had responsibilities, even my 5-year-old brother. Our family could set up camp in under 10 minutes with dinner on and my brother heading off to meet other people in the campground. He's still the family socialite. And from the US, we flew to the UK and camper vanned around there and through Europe and into Morocco. And that's what the picture with the monkey, that's where that's from. For about a year, I developed a fascination with maps with different scales. There was no GPS in the early 80s. And since our school correspondence didn't catch up with us until the last few months we were away, our parents basically taught us whatever they wanted as we traveled. And once the correspondence workbooks finally showed up, they let me work through them at my own pace, following my own nose. I caught up okay, with no clue that I was speeding through the curriculum. I don't remember very much of that trip, of course. At 8 to 9, I was too young. But I do remember a lot of reading, walking, churches, ruins, sacred sites, marinas, and museums, especially the one at Dachau, and looking at an image of an enormous pile of children's shoes and thinking a lot about that. No doubt because I was reading Animal Farm at around the same time too, realizing that people all have good and evil in them, including me, and something must lead them to choose what to do, which path to take. And you'd think that this would be an amazing set of experiences and skills to carry forward, right? Well, maybe, but what I had learned was to navigate continuously changing reality, not social structures and rules. I was completely confused by human society, the stuff everyone else seemed to know how to navigate. And the first upending of my world came when my parents divorced, very acrimoniously and unexpectedly when I was 10. I responded by trying to protect my brother through the custody wars and keep my parents' behavior under control. Yeah, I know, hubris, right? Anyway, my brother and I lived with Dad for 4 years in a small town while he built a business. Then we moved to live with Mum in the city. 3 years later, at 17, I moved out of home. I love my mum, but we were driving each other mad. I then spent 15 years bouncing around, scrabbling to find a grip on a career like society told me I should. I lost count of how many temp roles I took on in different companies and organizations, maybe more than 50. And I'd started and stopped different courses at university as well. Different universities, different cities in Australia. I didn't fail anything. I can learn, no problem. But I was trying to find something I could put my heart and soul into and focus on for long enough to specialize in it. And I just couldn't. I sampled philosophy, political science, law, commerce, civil engineering, psychological science, and IT before I gave formal education up as a bad joke in 2007. I did get a Bachelor of Arts in 2004, but only because they let people graduate with a hodgepodge of bits and pieces. At that point, I had to accept that I was an incorrigible generalist. From 2004 to 2017, after falling into IT, business analysis, and project management, I rode that generalist train as best I could. I did pretty well with it, except for one thing. I kept seeing zombies, like dead systems and processes and dead-end ideas and collapses waiting to happen, and couldn't for the life of me figure out why sometimes people were pleased when I would point them out, and sometimes they'd totally freak out and become infuriated with me. The backlash tended to hurt, and it was really confusing. I mean, what made some zombies fair game and others not? They all looked the same to me, and I really was just trying to help. Anyway, in 2010, I met a guy on the other side of the world who not only didn't get mad about my zombie spotting, but was pretty good at spotting them himself. Of course, we had to get married. So I moved to Amsterdam, and unwilling to subject myself to the nastiness of managing projects when I couldn't understand what people were saying in the hallways, I spent a couple of years freelancing online. That was a nice break from getting myself into trouble. But then in 2012, we moved to Australia, and I stepped back into office life and those zombie issues. By August 2017, I'd been in a full-time permanent position at a local government in Brisbane for nearly 4 years. I'd already pointed to a few zombies and upset people, and after a particularly stressful project, was on loan to the HR department looking at their systems. A few days after yet another zombie spotting fiasco, I joined the HR department in a core values session, which turned out to be pivotal. For the first time, I truly understood the degree to which my perception differed from the perceptions of the people around me. The values coach informed me that all of my core values were intrinsic. Everyone else's were mostly extrinsic, and their core values were near the bottom of my priority list. And when I tried to speak to one of my core values, control, because to me, it was about making conscious choices within my locus of control and surrendering to what was beyond my control, like the serenity prayer, really. Everyone in that room looked at me like I'd suddenly grown a few extra heads. And for once, there were no zombies in sight. It was bizarre. Anyway. Oh, sorry, I need to go back. That evening, I heard that my stepfather, Will, had died. It wasn't unexpected, but it was sooner than expected and too suddenly for me to be there with him. And we'd grown close over the preceding 25 years. My brother and I used to joke that where there was a will, there was a way, because he was street smart, almost unbelievably practical, and wise in a common sense, sort of down to earth way. He was also profoundly curious and well read, and my sailing and guitar buddy. And he'd understood me as well as anyone, except perhaps my husband. As far as my body was concerned, that was the final straw. It was not letting me go back to work. End of story. Pure and total rebellion. But even in dying, Will gifted wisdom. I can be thick-headed about some things, and it can take a real shock like that to get through to me. If Will had died a week earlier, or perhaps even a week later, I might not have had to confront the truth that what I've been doing with my life for the preceding 25 years was hanging on to zombie relationships with work and with society. I wasn't externally or extrinsically motivated by values, but I was controlled by fear of losing financial security if I let go of those particular zombies. In clinging to them, I'd been neglecting, ignoring, and abusing my own inner compass, and I was lost. At first, when I stepped off the fear treadmill in 2017, I thought all I had to do was start listening to my own inner compass more. But while it had always been great for the outside world, I soon found that internally it was horribly rusty. And looking back, I can see the process of getting it cleaned up and calibrated enough for Kyrotic flow to appear in early 2020. As always, I felt like I was just taking the next right step, with the minor difference of checking in with myself to make sure I wasn't letting those fear zombies take over again. But new things would come up, and so for a while I was still shifting direction more than I'd anticipated. I had a business idea first for an online shop driven by user-created relevance filters, saving everyone time and frustration. I was very excited about that. But then while walking one day, a concept exploded into my head, fully formed, for something I wasn't even thinking about, a global commons trust. I knew immediately that I didn't want to manage that project, but the concept wouldn't let go of me, so I dove into researching and network weaving online in an attempt to find an organization to hand it over to. Unsurprisingly, I guess, I didn't find a suitable candidate, but the process did rapidly highlight a serious bug in our cultural code, the widely accepted belief that we can own anything outside ourselves. I hadn't really thought about it before, but as I actually looked at it, I saw the bug and I saw all the zombies that it generates. Problem solved, I thought. Ha, no. It took me 18 months to disentangle that sucker from my perceptual system and recalibrate everything it was messing with. 18 months, I kid you not. That ownership axiom runs so deep. At first, it felt like I was tripping over it every 5 minutes. The last thread, I think, fell away when Manuel and I sold our house in early 2020 and moved to Sydney. And I'd guess that ownership concept was the last thing preventing me from seeing Kyrotic flow clearly. Not that I had a name for it when it showed up, just the archetypes and the diagram. But it was enough for it to guide Manuel and I in preparing for COVID lockdowns 3 weeks in advance. Kyrotic flow made it that obvious that the lockdowns and supermarket runs and so on had to happen. So I didn't think much of it at first. I was just relieved to have clarity. But then it started showing up everywhere. I thought I was going mad, so I shared it with a few people online for a sanity check. I heard a whole lot of, wow, that makes sense. And Kyrotic flow started taking on a life of its own. The next year, Manuel and I moved to Portugal, intending to develop software in service to the commons. We made slow progress with that as we settled in through 2022. But Kyrotic flow was getting louder and louder, and it got named. And then I met another cluster of people, including Trey Ashley Garron and Mike Schumann. And before I knew what was happening, Last year, I found myself running along behind chirotic flow, just trying to keep up with it. I swear it's calling the shots now. I'm writing a book, bringing in the 5 elements, and doing ministerial training around it. And here I am now with you. It's a total madhouse, but I'm oriented now, discovering more every day and loving every second of it. Chirotic flow is my internal navigation system. It's both a lens. Sorry, did someone say something?
No.
Okay. So chirotic flow is my internal navigation system. It's both a lens for perceiving reality and a compass for orienting to it. Or to state that another way, chirotic flow is how I see zombies. A zombie, as I use the term, it's not an undead human being, but any structure or form that is dead but still active in the world. Zombies were once vital entities, processes and systems and patterns and forms that had a purpose and met needs of life. They were values-driven and necessary. But change is inevitable. Every form of life decays and dies with time. If the spirit that enlivened it is released to move on, it will take another form and enliven that. Zombies are what happens when the dead form won't let go and instead holds its original enlivening spirit trapped inside itself, unable to transmute into a new form that is suited to the new reality. Many of humanity's ideas, systems, and institutions are now zombies. The zombie form can be seen in things like red tape, perverse incentives, false axioms like ownership, dissonant relationships that are out of integrity with life, failing institutions, and so on. The zombie form continues itself by feeding on our minds, skewing our perceptions and telling us that we need to cling to its form for security. We cling to zombies and keep them active because we're afraid of death and the unknown. Chirotic flow is a cycle of life activities, all of which are necessary and equally important for life. The cycle operates at multiple levels. When the cycle is healthy and sacred, life spirit is performing whatever activity is needed at the right kairos time, using power the right way, in the right form. When the cycle is unhealthy, life spirit must still go through the sequence, but it struggles to adapt to and survive in corrupted conditions. And those adaptations can get very ugly. The saying that power corrupts is frankly missing the boat entirely. Power only corrupts an activity when it's stuck in a form that doesn't fit the activity, like a zombie, really. Anyway, the 6 archetypes represent phases of activity. They're all necessary, all equally important, and occur in a necessary sequence, like the seasons. The outputs or the results of one archetype's activity become inputs for the next archetype's activity. Natural law is freaking amazing. It even handles necessary trade-offs around competing needs at different times, with tensions held between opposing archetypes, those dotted lines running between the opposites. I'm going to go into these in depth, but I just wanted to show you the overview. I always start with figuring out where we are, where things are at, and what is needed. And this is steward's perspective. A steward's job is to maintain, repair, and nurture the form that life already has, guarding what is sacred to the health of that being from destructive forces, and tending to its ongoing needs as a whole entity. That entity could be a cell, a plant, an ant colony, a human being, or a human-built organization. Steward's activity and perspective is effectively the same across contexts. We can, for example, steward ourselves, our families, institutions, countries, and the planet. Unfortunately, we can, and often do, also steward zombies. When steward fails, the next archetype, curator, is needed to pluck the baby out of the bathwater. Curator determines what to keep for later use and what to dispose of. Curator is the death phase, not necessarily for the entity as a whole, but in the sense of stopping whatever is no longer fit for purpose and is wasting resources rather than meeting needs. Curator whittles life back to integrity and exposes unmet needs. Curator hospices those zombies. After curator comes scout, the least visible of the archetypes, because its subtle, delicate, vulnerable, and gestational activities are usually hidden behind protective barriers, a womb, a chrysalis, a seed, or an idea still forming in a mind. The Scout archetype's activities are exploratory, sensing into unknown surrounds and into what is needed to discover what is there and what is possible now for meeting needs. Mapping a sort of possibilities and risks landscape as it goes, Scout weighs up the potential benefits and costs of the possibilities it finds for meeting needs and prioritizes accordingly. The move from Scout to Pioneer is like birth or the start of a new day. Looking into the adjacent possible, Pioneer selects an opportunity or option for action that looks promising and acts. Pioneer has a goal, an objective to reach. There's a point of focus, of agency striving towards something, of testing a hypothesis and experimenting and iterating until it's viable in reality. The Pioneer phase starts with an attempt and usually after much failure along the way, ends with success. Cultivator's job is to grow and thrive, using resources as effectively and efficiently as possible to increase vitality. Cultivator realizes potential, sensing into what works and what doesn't, probing for and listening to feedback from the environment and refining responses. Growth goes beyond mere size and scale. We can improve experiences, develop them to make them richer. We can make a product more beautiful, more useful, better in some way. Eventually, though, the returns on energy invested in improvement become too small to bother with, and repetition makes more sense. And this is where regulator comes in, ensuring that the process is repeated reliably, so life can attend to other things. Regulator provides stable access to the substrates the entity needs, as and when they're needed. Think of skeletons in our circulatory system, transporting nutrients in our blood to wherever they're needed. And in society, our languages, roads, plumbing, sewerage and irrigation systems, the internet and software platforms. And once that distribution is set up, the cycle goes back to steward for maintenance, repair, nurturing and protection, not only of the systems regulator just created, but of the whole living entity. And thank you for your time and attention. This is how to contact me, and I can share it again later, along with some photos that I don't want, that I don't actually want published on YouTube. So thank you.